Clapper board, you're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled Galactic Council's Dismay as Humans Refuse All Diplomacy. HFY sci-fi story. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now, we begin. The first thing anyone noticed about the Orion Veil wasn't its beauty, though it was beautiful in a stubborn, iron-veined way. It was the silence. Ships passing the veil lowered their voices. Engineers walked lighter on the deck grates, as if afraid to awaken something asleep inside the violet folds of dust and starlight. And at the very edge of that hush, where the nebula thinned into a black sea, hung a human listening post nicknamed Jericho Station. It was ugly, a sprawl of armored rings and gunmetal ribs, bristling with antennae like a hedgehog raised against the night. But to a certain breed of pilot, it was the loveliest thing they had ever seen. It meant home. It meant that beyond this line the rules changed, and the long, soft hand of the Galactic Council, so good at patting heads and tightening collars, could not follow. On a rain-washed morning on Earth, which is to say the night over Jericho Station, Marshal Aurora Reyes stood alone in a bunker room beneath the drowned foundations of Old Geneva and listened to recordings not meant for comfort. Reyes was not yet 50 but wore the mantle of command like someone twice that age. The years had carved narrow gullies down her cheeks, and she kept her hair close cropped to the skull as if to deny time the pleasure of grip. Her staff had left the recorder's volume very low out of courtesy. She turned it up until the raw edges of voices scraped the concrete walls. First came the screaming of burning air. Then a voice, not quite human, not quite anything else. "Do not come here," it said, in the calm tone of someone noticing rain. "For your sake, for ours." The voice had been found on all 5 black boxes recovered from the Council's expedition into human space 2 years prior. The expedition had gone in under banners white as bleached bone, and it had been swallowed whole. The Council called it murder. On Earth, the mourners listening to shipboard ghosts called it a mercy. There were worse deaths than vanishing, if the histories were to be believed. There were worse fates than silence. A soft footstep behind her. General Harker, older than Reyes by 20 years, the color of winter fog. He had a way of standing that made rooms straighten. He did not ask permission to enter. Old wolves do not knock. "They've massed again," he said. "Concordia is screaming peace with a knife under the napkin." Reyes exhaled and killed the recording. The bunker returned to the living, human sounds of ventilators and distant generators. How many hulls? Enough to dig a grave for a planet if they are careless, enough to dig 50 if they're bored. Harker's voice was neither proud nor afraid, it was geography. "Thera's crest is flashing blue on every broadcast. She wants us to meet beneath the veil. She'll come herself." She being the Chancellor who swore the Valari children were relocated and then gave their bones to artists, Reyes said. "That Thera." Harker's jaw ticked. "That one." Reyes looked at the concrete ceiling as if trying to see the stars through stone. Earth had been buried in layers of its own making. First iron and fear during the last centuries of chaos, then patience, then purpose. Deep shelters and deeper factories like honeycombs in bedrock, ceaseless assembly lines that fed vats birthing machines that birthed ships. Oceans seeded with leviathans of alloy and algae, the lungs of a war that dared not speak its name. Above, the Bastions, ring fortresses so large that their shadows could be seen on the surface of clouds, slept like bracelets around a beloved wrist. Humanity had learned the hard way that every treaty is an invitation to disarm. And so they had made a different vow: we will not be ready to die. We will be ready to live in the face of anyone who wants us smaller. "Send probes," Reyes said. Harker's laugh was a single breath through his nose. "Already gone," he said, but he saluted anyway because old wolves can still be ceremonious. The first probes had been diamonds without facets, black as sin and twice as hungry for light. They moved like ideas, impossible until you saw them working. They drank energy aimed at them, turned lasers into milk, missiles into scripture, entropy into a suggestion politely refused. They had gone out into the galaxy without names and come back with a very human habit. They watched. Not to gloat, not to threaten, but to know the math of the board. Humans had once tried to play by rules they did not write and had learned that such games end in chains. The new game was simple: nobody moves us. The probe sat now over council worlds and border outposts like a punctuation the galaxy did not enjoy reading. They transmitted nothing save a heartbeat and an occasional polite phrase: do not interfere, do not approach, do not. Yet they were not walls, they were windows. Through them the Terran isolation looked at the Council's face, and in doing so made the Council look at its own reflection. The Council did not like what it saw. In the desiccated moonscape of Concordia, the Council's capital, a world carved into a temple, High Chancellor Thera watched herself from 30 angles before removing a single ornament from her crest and setting it on a silk-dressed table. Gesture mattered in her culture. The removal of a luminal gem meant humility. Or, to those who spoke her language without believing in it, it meant theater. Humility must sound like surrender without being it, murmured Kelthar of the Threxan, mandibles clicking in patient anxiety. Terran minds hear a concession and smell blood. Show them grace and they will call it poison. Show them kindness and they will call it bait. Thera rose. She towered over Kelthar like a lantern over a knife. Perhaps because that is what we have made of grace, she said, not without bitterness. We offered sanctuary to the Valari. We moved their cities to settlements with gardens and teachers and safe work. We called it kindness. And then we took the best of their artists. We took the best of their memories. We took what we liked and labeled the rest a debt to be paid across generations. Kelthar's eyes flickered with quick, hard intelligence. You will not live long speaking like that with microphones on. Then I shall speak without them, Thera said, and for once turned the cameras off. The chamber shivered with the absence of an audience. We will go to the Veil. I will go. No armed escorts beyond the token. We will bring white light and unarmed ships. We will bring truth. If the Terrans kill me, it will be martyrdom enough to burn their name into every planet as a curse. If they do not, then perhaps, we begin again. And if they turn their diamonds on Concordia and peel us like a fruit, Thera's crest pulsed the color of Lakais. Then our monuments will remember we died facing what we made. The fleet assembled with a precision forged in 1,000 choreographed wars. Vessels like glazed insects with wings made of plasma crystal. Living hulls that flexed and healed. Swarms that were not ships at all but decisions congealed into chitin and nerve. They surged to the Veil with the grace of a tiger walking into a village with its teeth hidden but its hunger awake. The banners they carried were white light in vacuum. No color, all colors. A pretense of peace that still unsettled the eye. Jericho Station read them at a distance and sent a single narrow beam into the ocean of signals. You will stop at 10,000 kilometers from the line. Failure to comply is consent to consequences. Thera's flagship, the Scriptorium of Dawn, whose vaulted decks were temples to languages cathedraled across the centuries, came to heel at precisely 9,999. She stepped alone into a chamber lit in soft blue and stood before a window 3 decks high. Beyond, the Orion Veil hung in silence, parting like a curtain. She could see, if she let her gaze relax, the hints of shadow geometry beyond, a pattern inside a pattern, as if the veil were a veil in truth, and beyond it stood something that had been waiting a very long time. She hoped the seeing of it was merely the strain in her eyes. She hoped a great many things. She lowered her crest and spoke. Terrans, we come without weapon, we come without chain, we come to speak and to listen. We acknowledge our cruelties, we acknowledge our mistakes. We once believed our council was an engine of mercy and law. We have learned it is an engine before it is anything else, an engine's grind. The translator fields carried her words into the human tongue and back out again into 100 others, just in case the humans had decided to raise a hand to the choir. The emptiness answered with a small, precise sound. Then the space between the veils' folds rippled, like heat over asphalt, like breath on glass, and a ship slipped into visibility. No mother of ships. A moon carved into blade and folded until it forgot it had been round. It was both too spare and too dense to look upon for long. Its edges disagreed with being edges at all. It drank light and it bent lines and it had no insignia. The only mark upon it was negative space in the shape of two small words, "Stay away." A voice arrived, a human baritone ground smooth by years of speaking to rooms where everyone was already angry. "You have come to talk," it said. "We have told you not to, you have come anyway. You mistake us for the people we were before we learned to count our dead properly." Thaira lowered her eyes for a blink and raised them again. "I am Thaira," she said. "I am the last of the chancellors willing to say we were wrong without choking on the word. May I ask your name?" "You may ask," said the voice. It did not give her the mercy she requested. It said instead, "You may leave." She might have tried a dozen approaches. She had prepared 1,000. She chose none of them. In that second she realized there was only one path human beings would walk without spitting. "We killed the Valari," she said simply. "We did it slowly with paper, not quickly with knives, so we could pretend we were civilized. We arranged their deaths with words because words wash the hands even if the water is red. We would have done the same to you. We would have confused your generosity for weak will and made you pay for your laughter with your labor. When you said no, we would have called you savage and congratulated ourselves on our pity. We were wrong. We are what we accused you of being." Silence. The kind of silence that confuses translators into thinking a packet was lost. Then the human spoke in the softer register of someone remembering a blade under a shirt. "What do you want?" "To stop being that," Thaira said. "Humans, even when unseen, make a certain sound when you tell them you want to change. It is part hope and part suspicion and part inventory taking behind the eyes." The voice took a while to come back. "If you wanted to stop being that," it said, "you would have stopped a very long time ago." "We did not have a mirror then," said Thaira. She gestured to the star where the diamond probes had once been and still might be. "You brought one." "The mirror is costly," the human said. "Do you know what was taken from us to make it? Do you know what kind of childhood breeds a species that can keep a silence this long and call it mercy?" Another voice lifted, ragged but impossible to ignore. General Harker in the bunker under Old Geneva, speaking into a narrow tunnel between worlds. "We learned in a house where the oldest rule was simple," he said. "No one is coming to save you." Thaira did not bow, she did not posture, she did not cry. Those were her instincts, and instincts are the first debts a leader must pay. She watched the blade moon breathe photons and gather shadows. "Let us pay the cost of the mirror," she said. "I have no chains to offer you. I have no bonds you would trust. I only have a promise without teeth. We will dismantle what we built. We will, and here at last I ask permission, watch." "Watch what?" Harker asked, and his word had a fatigue all humane souls understand. The ache of a lamp kept lit because darkness would be worse. "The people we used when we stopped using them." "We've watched that for 1,000 years, Harker said. "It usually ends with the watchers writing a book and the used digging a new ditch." "You asked what we want," Thaira said. "We want to stand on the side of the ditch where the shovels aren't." The blade moon tilted, a gesture of a head that was not there. "Words," the human said, but the contempt had softened or perhaps hardened into something like care. "Still only words." "Yes," Thaira agreed, "until they are stone." The transmission blinked out. The blade moon dissolved into refraction and then into a simple hole in the star field. The white banners trembled at the edges as if shy of whatever wind blows in vacuum. Kelthar exhaled through his mandibles like a saw easing off a knot. "We live," he said, and his relief was so honest it verged on prayer. "Not yet," Thera murmured. "Now we work." Work, in the Dictionary of Empires, is an act done to someone else while calling it society. To turn the definition on its head would take more than declarations. It would take the council burning its old maps and tearing its polished teeth on its own debts. It would take the kind of courage usually reserved for the poor. On a sulfur-yellow moon where the Valari had been relocated to teach them diligence, Thera descended from a ship with a plain crest and a plain face and no escort, and sat on the ground in the dust until the elders came to see why the Chancellor was dirtying her silk. "We are done," she said to their old, careful eyes. "We are done pretending. Tell me what to carry." An elder named Seta, her hands like roots tangled around stones, placed a rusted shovel in Thera's soft palms. The wood was polished by 1,000 days of grief. The blade's edge still remembered skulls even though it had only learned bones by rumor. "Carry this," Seta said. "Carry it until your wrists tremble. Then carry it another hour, because that is when the ditch starts feeling like a grave, and that is when we decide who sleeps in it. And because shame can be a good teacher if you let it be, Thera did." News of a chancellor weeping in dust moved through the council like summer lightning through trees that had forgotten storms. Some said it was theater. Some said it was calculation. Some, often the ones whose hands had never blistered, said it was beneath her. None of that mattered to Seta's people, who watched their justice begin with dirt under a crest. On a cold evening over the Pacific Bastions, a cohort of human pilots floated beneath the skin of the atmospheric shield like sharks watching the reflection of a man on a pier. Among them, a pilot named HFY, call sign Choir, played old Earth hymns through her cockpit's bone conduction plate and did not sing. She had a child's drawing taped to her console, 2 stick figures under a star that was too big and too close, holding hands while knives fell around them like rain. She had found it etched into a bunker wall in old New Delhi 6 years ago and carried it ever since. Her job tonight, as on most nights, was simple and impossible: make sure nothing reached Earth that Earth did not invite. Her wingman, a square-shouldered giant named Petter who flew like a brick dropped by a god, murmured, "You think they believe her?" "Which they?" HFY asked. "Any of them." HFY watched the floats of Council relief ships bending toward Valari space. Council relief ships had once meant armed supervision with blankets in the shape of handcuffs. Now they meant people bringing bread and sleeping on the ground beside those they fed. She wanted to believe it would last. She did not. "Belief is a luxury," she said. "We ask for behavior." Petter grunted. "Reyes says the same." "Reyes says it with better words," HFY said, not unkindly, and thought of the woman beneath Geneva who had turned warnings into an art. "We watch. We endure. We do not abandon. We do not let anyone chain our hands so they can say we did not help when the fire started. Hard way to live. Only one we get." The hard way lasted. It lasted through one reform and the collapse of 2 others. It lasted through 3 assassinations, none human, though that did not stop the gossip engines from grinding out guilt. It lasted through famines addressed honestly, and epidemics addressed quickly, and old grudges that did not go quietly, and new grudges born of fixing old mistakes. It lasted through Kelthar's resignation. He went home to raise eggs and write a book titled Mandible and Mirror that made half the council furious enough to think. It lasted through Harker's death. The old man slid out of this world in a chair by a window with his boots on, and his coat folded neatly on his lap, and a smile like an apology written to no one living. It lasted through Thera's breaking. She returned to the Valari moon year after year, shovel in hand, until one day her crest simply did not lift from the weight of everything she knew. Seta was with her when she fell to her knees in a ditch that was becoming a road. "You carried it long enough to be tired for the right reasons," the elder said, and helped her stand. But the hard way had never been merely a human virtue or a council penance. It was a meteorological fact of the universe. Somewhere far beyond Orion, inside a black cupboard where the first architects of the council had once opened their eyes and found a way to profit from fear, something else weighed the light and found it delicious. Human probes, those quiet black diamonds that love to drink beams, began to return with recordings too cold to burn. Not ships, not even creatures, though some engineers swore their outlines recalled teeth. Not hunger exactly, because hunger is patient. This was want sharpened by arithmetic, ancient and busy. They lived where geometry is a scream and gravity is a trick and time is a table you flip when the conversation bores you. They did not travel, they unfolded, and they were folding toward the bright noise of a galaxy that had spent 10,000 years making itself look like dinner to anything with a good ear. Reyes watched the projections from 3 different angles and then closed her eyes because the angles did not matter. Only the slope did. How long? She asked the room, and the room, which was full of brilliant people trying to be useful, did not answer because the right word was too much like a prayer. Petter, who had traded his cockpit for a console because bones age even when spirits do not, raised a hand as if asking permission to weep. "If we talk," he said, "do they listen?" Reyes looked at the map of unfolding teeth. "We refused diplomacy," she said. "We did not refuse speaking." Earth summoned the council, not to the Veil, but to a place humans felt unafraid, Jericho Station, whose bones had listened to the cold for too long to be surprised by wolves. They came, not just Thera, but representatives from species nobody had thought able to leave their swamps or their asteroids. They came because the human signal did not say peace. It did not say we forgive. It said, if you want to live, bring your tools. The chamber was not a chamber at all, but a hollow sphere of armored glass looking over a curve of blue planet, with the Veil whispering secrets on the horizon like an old aunt who had finally decided to tell the children the truth about where the silverware came from. Reyes stood beside a table whose surface was not a screen but a trough in which fields bent into shapes as hand as dust. "We will not join your council," she began. "We will not submit to your treaties, your courts, your good intentions. If you need to hear it for the last time, here it is, no." A faint murmur, quickly crushed by the weight of the air. "But we will fight beside you, because the mathematicians in our guts say even the worst of you look like family compared to the horizon." "Help," Thera said, not because she wanted a smaller word, but because the largest words are the wrong tools for honest need. Reyes gestured, and the trough filled with a model of that horizon, unfolding lattices that defied the neatness of ships and the comfort of evil made pretty. "They do not want our planets because planets are where slow creatures sleep," Reyes said. "They want what we are made of, and they do not care what our names are. We have 2 languages they cannot translate, endurance and refusal. We have built a way to speak both at once." She raised her hand and Jericho Station shuddered as if swallowing. Something unclenched outside, great rings turning within rings. From the northern bastions came a glittering ribbon of drones like fish streaming upriver to spawn. From ocean trenches boiled towers the size of cities, plated in mother-of-night alloys that drank starlight like soup. The bastions themselves woke like old cats and stretched and became things with new edges. "We call it the choir," Reyes said, almost smiling toward a Shaz ghost in every pilot reading the word. "Not soldiers alone, not machines alone. A chorus, each voice humble, together impossible to shut up." "Will it be enough?" someone asked, a voice with too many syllables to be comforting. "If we ask that question again," Reyes said, "we're already dead." The first note of the choir sang not into space but into that cupboard where the unfolding things were. It was not music. It was mathematics that remembered how to dance. The rings at Earth's throat licked the edge of reality and found a seam, and the seam widened like an eye waking. Through it came silence clean as a blade. The choir did not rush. It made the silence a space in which others could breathe. The council fleets arrived ragged and brave, the instruments of old ugliness made into tools by being finally used to defend rather than to herd. Thera's scriptorium shed its ceremonial sails and wore matte plating like contrition. Valari ships, patched, stubborn, beautiful, tucked shut the knife wings they had grown in secret, and unveiled engines carved from the poems their children had written in the dirt of their work camps. A dozen minor species nobody had named properly because empires don't learn names unless the named can pay, revealed themselves like larks beating back a hawk by being many and unafraid. They did not form lines, they formed neighborhoods. The choir taught them this. Hold each other, the mathematics sang. Lend mass, lend direction, do not be yourself, be each other. The unfolding things arrived like a thought you are ashamed to think. No drums, no monologues. The starfield bent around them not because they were heavy but because they were certain. They touched the first neighborhood and unmade half of it with the casual cruelty of a hand sweeping crumbs. The choir learned and the neighborhood learned with it. The second touch unmade less. The third touched nothing at all but light. Petter, retired, re-enlisted, unable to give up the sky, laughed so loudly in his cockpit that 2 translators quit their jobs. The war did not look like wars the council remembered and told stories about. There were no charges. There were exchanges like conversations at dinner, where nobody wins but everyone eats more than they should. There were moments when the choir pretended to be wounded, so an unfolding thing would lean close and hear a word it did not have before, a word like no, and draw back bleeding from a cut it could not find. There were deaths. Human voices cut off with the blankness of a dying battery, Valari songs breaking mid-phrase and leaving a hole you could fall into, Thel crystal chords shattering into glitter that fell like snow on empty orbits. There were victories that looked like a neighborhood lasting long enough for a child to wake from a nap and not be afraid. In a pocket between battles, Thera stood again with a shovel, this time not on a moon, but on the hull of a scriptorium patched with scars. She had insisted on putting her own hands to work rewiring a spindle that would drink the next catastrophe and turn it into less of one. Seta's words survived inside her wrists. Kelthar's jaw worked beside her. Mandibles made for war now turned to gentle tasks. He looked up once and pointed with a foreleg at a human figure tethered to a line, tightening bolts with the intensity of prayer. "Is that your choir?" he asked. The figure turned its helmet and smiled with all of its teeth like a lighthouse. Asha raised a hand and let it hover in a wave. "We," she said, her voice coming through in a dozen accents because of a dozen translators, "are. The thing that ends a war rarely looks like an ending. It looks like each side deciding a different thing at once and then pretending it was a plan. The unfolding creatures did not sue for peace because peace is a word you need a mouth for. They receded along seams they had brought with them and took their certainty away to somewhere with worse light. The choir did not pursue. Endurance does not hunt trophies because trophies are heavy. The neighborhoods did not celebrate so much as inhale. Earth did not broadcast victory. It sent coordinates for hospitals, council channels filled with a noise that had not been heard on Concordia in 10,000 years, gratitude spoken without billable hours. A Valari child in a sling on a human medic's belly grabbed a crest and refused to let go until the crest bent low and stayed. A Korthan took off a slate of armor and left it on a field where someone softer might need it later. Petter, gravity finally catching up to bones, sat in a hangar and told a joke so bad that 3 species wrote papers about why it worked. The joke was this: how do you tell a Terran to be diplomatic? You don't. You tell them to build a bigger table. When the last black seam closed, the veil gathered itself as if a wind had gone home. Jericho Station stopped shuddering and returned to its old work, listening. Reyes sat with her boots on a table against regulations she had written and watched the ceiling as if expecting a star to poke through. Harker's chair had been placed beside hers. She did not sit in it. You do not sit in a ghost seat. You nod to it, and then you speak to why the seat is empty. She stood in front of a single camera and looked at the same species she had just fought beside and against and for and because of, and she said, "Without music, we will not take seats at your council. We will not let your laws reach our children. We will not pretend we do not know what power does to honesty, but doors stand. The veil is not a wall. We will answer calls for help. We will send our choir to funerals we did not cause to carry the heavy end of the casket. We will send bread first and blueprints second and warnings always. If you come for us with chains, we will meet you with the only diplomacy we keep, the kind that says no. If you come to ask how we lived through a horizon that wanted us smaller, we will tell you. The lesson is not beautiful. It is not short. It is not something you can buy. It is this: we learn to endure." Thaira sent no reply. She had discovered the grace of shutting up. She took the shovel Seta had left leaning against a wall and hung it in the scriptorium beside the crest gem she had once removed for theater. One was penance, the other instruction. She did not light them with glory. She left them in plain shadow. On earth, Ashad trimmed the tape on the drawing at the edge of her console because the adhesive had grown brittle from too many heat cycles. She tucked it under a clear plate and ran a thumb over the stick figures until the two little heads shone with oil from her skin. She did not cry, though the body keeps its own rainfall schedule. She went to the ocean and watched a bastion across the horizon throw a shadow on water and thought of cities that sleep under waves to keep the sky from finding them. Petter joined her and handed her a cup of something hot and sweet that tasted like home cooked on a camp stove. "You think we made a mistake?" he asked, not like a soldier asking a superior, but like a man asking a friend if the road ahead would be better if they turned. Ashad drank and rolled her shoulders under a jacket with patches that meant loss more than rank. "We didn't join them," she said. "We didn't let them join us. We stood next to them when something tried to eat them," Petter said. "Maybe that's what joining looks like for people like us," Ashad said, and let the thought stand. In the years that followed, the galaxy learned new manners the way stubborn children learn not to touch hot pans, by touching and hurting and remembering. The council did not dissolve. It learned to shut down parts of itself that had always been parties and open parts that had always been quiet rooms where people worked. The elders died. The young did not reinvent cruelty, though they tried. There will always be markets. There will always be laws. But there were now, somewhere out near the Veil, people watching who would not come to your party no matter how nice your house was, but who would come to your fire with a bucket even if you had thrown the first coal. It made the galaxy braver in some quarters and more honest in others. It did not fix everything. Fixing everything is a job for liars. In a museum on Concordia that had once only told one story, a schoolchild whose crest had not yet learned to lie stood before a shovel hanging in shadow, and a gem that did not catch light the way it should, and read the plaque aloud with the solemnity children give words they do not yet own. Artifact of reconstitution, you carry it until your wrists tremble, then carry it another hour. The child looked at the teacher and asked, "Why?" The teacher, whose wrists had trembled once in a ditch becoming a road, smiled without showing teeth. "Because that is when you decide who sleeps in it," she said. And the child looked surprised, as if work could be a spell. On a Valari world with grass like knives softened by dew and stone like bread baked too long, Seta sat on a porch with grandchildren asleep in hammocks, and watched the evening turn the hills the green of forgiveness, and the sky the red of apologies that were meant. She had refused 1,000 interview requests and had answered twice as many letters from people asking how to be good. She always wrote the same first sentence, "You will fail." She always wrote the same second sentence, "Try anyway." She listened as the wind rattled the old shovel she kept leaned against a beam, so she would remember she was not done yet. In the bunker under Old Geneva, which had been turned into a school because children are the best soldiers against forgetting, Ray's taught once a month. She taught navigation and the math of patience and the history of a word the human tongue used like salve and blade. No. She suspended a small diamond in a glass case and let the students aim pocket lasers at it until they understood what a metaphor is. She slept little, not because nightmares are brave, but because sunsets are short and she wanted to catch them. Sometimes she took Harker's chair to a rooftop and left it facing east and sat on the floor beside it. She talked about nothing in particular to a man whose absence had become a kind of presence. When she died, years later, the choir sang a low note at the edge of hearing that made some species weep without knowing why. There were still emissaries, because there will always be someone who wants to talk when the talking is over and someone who wants to leave cookies on the porch of a neighbor who keeps their fence high. Some were genuine. Some were traps built by old habits. Some were mistakes that could be forgiven. The choir did not answer the door with a weapon. It answered with a light in its hand that showed where the road was unsafe. One winter, an Illyrian historian named Isha Te, young in years but old in the way curiosity makes you, came alone to Jericho Station and asked no permission to enter and no forgiveness when she timed her breath to match the hum of old engines. She walked to a window and put her hands on the glass and thought of a book she would never write because some stories cannot be trapped between paper and still be true. A human stood beside her, a maintenance worker with grease under the nails, which is how you know you're home, and said nothing. They stood together looking at a blue planet the way people look at a fire that has warmed them without demanding their names. Isha said finally, because historians must eventually words, they refused diplomacy. The humans shook their head. No, they said, and the word carried the weight of wars that kept children alive. We refused being smaller. Somewhere far beyond the veil, an unfolding thing paused at a seam and changed its mind, and went another way because somewhere in the arithmetic it now carried a piece of a choir. And in that piece was a sound it did not have before, a chord that means stay. Somewhere on Concordia, a law written by someone too young to remember the old songs banned the purchase of a people for the purpose of making art, and someone older tried to argue that art requires sacrifice, and then did not, because a shovel in a museum made it hard to be elegant about murder. Somewhere in a Valari town, a little girl drew two stick figures under a star that was exactly the size it should be, holding hands while rain fell around them and nobody had a knife. She taped it to a wall and the tape held because the building was warm. And when the galaxy, as galaxies always do, tried to forget what it had learned because forgetting feels like sleep and sleep is sweet, a signal went out from no place and every place. And in 100 tongues and 100 scripts and 100 chords, it said the same thing with a softness that could dent stone if you let it. We are still here. The council never again offered Earth a seat. They learned to send questions instead, and accept that some would be turned away like stray dogs that nevertheless return because the porch light is on. Thera died in the dirt with a smile that made her first years ashamed of what her last made beautiful. Kelthar's eggs hatched, and one of his children refused Mandible's polished sharp, preferring the blunt honesty of tools. Petter taught jokes to cadets, and told them there is no such thing as a punchline when the sound you are making is survival. Asha retired and did not. She sailed a boat on water because sometimes you have to remember that the sky has a twin, and when she died, the choir sent a single drone to hover over the place her ashes met salt, not to guard it, but to listen to waves figure out how to be what they always were. The Blade Moon was never seen again by anyone who knew to point and name it, but there are nights on Jericho Station when a shadow passes the window in a way that makes lights flicker. The engineers, who are the poets of practical matters, shake their heads and smile and write on clipboards. Phenomena consistent with myth, no immediate danger. Children who live on the station, because children live everywhere people refuse to die, press their faces to the glass and swear they see a word written in negative space where no letters should be. Stay away, it says, and they do not hear threat in it anymore. They hear a tired kindness humans give to door-to-door salesmen and invading armadas alike. We have enough. Thank you. We are busy living. Busy living looks like this. A council world where the market closes early so a funeral can have the street. A human city where the last bunker becomes a library because the children want to play in a room that used to smell like oil and fear and teach it new air. A border outpost where a probe, old now, scarred, almost sentimental, still drifts above in case anyone's memory slips, and a mechanic puts a hand on the viewport and whispers, "I remember." The stars above Jericho Station burned cold and distant, and because the people beneath them had learned which gods were just stories and which were math, they loved those cold lamps with a fierceness that did not ask for warmth back. The station drifted. The veil breathed. The world turned beneath a shield that had never been a wall but a promise. Not that harm would never come, but that when it did there would be someone holding a bucket and a word carved into bone. The galaxy did not conquer itself. Empires did not evaporate and then compose symphonies about how nice they were being, but there were fewer chains. There were more roads built from ditches. There were neighborhoods that remembered how to be neighborhoods when neighbors were strange. There were tables made longer by carpenters who refused to build thrones. There were shovels cleaned and hung where little hands could touch them and ask, "What is this for?" and be told, "To carry until you tremble." And there was earth, stubborn and quiet, the house at the end of the lane with a fence that kept no one out and a light that stayed on for the ones who came with empty hands and honest hunger. It was not a utopia. Utopias are museums with better lighting. It was a place where people woke and worked and went to sleep knowing that to be human is not to be splendid but to be unfinished, and to hold unfinishedness with enough courage that it looks, from a distance, like grace. One last transmission, sent not as declaration but as reminder, carried on a frequency the council had learned to check when they felt the old itch to tidy the wild out of the world. It was Ray's voice, recorded long before her chair faced the east and emptiness took the seat beside it. It said, "You do not have to be like us. We refuse your chains not because you deserve them but because no one does. If you want to call this diplomacy, you did not hear me. If you want to call this war, you did not see me. If you want to live, live. If you want to live near us, know this, we will not conquer you and we will not let you conquer us. We came from a planet that taught us to be small until it needed us to be vast. We are neither, we are simply here." The signal faded into the sound of a station sleeping, which is a soft clatter and an honest hum. Somewhere, a pilot laughed at a bad joke. Somewhere, a child pressed a drawing to a wall. Somewhere, the veil folded and unfolded as if tasting the edge of morning. And everywhere the lesson kept being learned and forgotten and learned again. Not victory, not dominion, not sweet talk, but something harder and more ordinary and more ferocious because it insists on tomorrow. And that day, the galaxy learned, humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.